Do you have trouble focusing so much so that you can't watch every single episode of Won't You Be My Gamer back to back? Well, our guest, Jamie Kreiner, has a solution for you.
It's Medieval Monks.
It's Medieval Monks. And today we are talking with Jamie about what monks knew that those of us who suffer from ADHD might benefit from. Nicole, what are we playing?
We are playing Pentiment, and it is a game where we are going to be reading a lot and getting to know some really nice monks. That sounds great. Yeah.
It sounds delightful.
Some monks are actually kind of mean. You'll see. I am a scribe. I work for a bunch of monks. I walk like this.
And there's some medieval murder mystery, right?
It could be.
I don't know what time period this is supposed to be exactly.
I think it said like 1560.
Oh, 1518. So if you see anything that you're like, this is not correct, let's put this game on blast.
Full disclosure, this is like 1,000 years after what I know really well.
Oh, okay.
But there are some continuities. We'll see what I can do.
Great.
We welcome wild accusations on the show.
Unfounded judgments. Oh my gosh, another pig.
Okay, so
you
these
guys
guys are so
Can't
cute.
escape them.
See, these are a little bit better than the other ones because they've got the fur on them. And you can see even a couple of tusks. Yeah, they are cute.
I do love that you're like, my two focuses, pigs and monks.
Yeah, there's a thread there somewhere.
Yeah, what got you interested in medieval monks?
Monks were some of the chattiest writers we've got from the Middle Ages. They wrote a ton of stuff. And a lot of the stuff I really liked to read was advice they gave each other on how to be better monks because they got frustrated all the time about how hard it was.
What does it mean to be a good monk?
For a lot of them, it was like focusing on the stuff they had intended to do when they first converted to monasticism. So like basically paying attention to God. That was being a good monk, living an ethical life according to what God wants you to do. Mm-hmm. But they got super distracted.
And how did they get distracted?
It's like stuff we get distracted by. They'd be like reading and they're like, I wonder what time it is. They like look out the window to check the sun.
They're like, I want to go outside and play.
They'd be like, oh, a snack sounds really good.
I can pet this cat.
Dude, it sounds like I could be a monk, medieval monk.
You too could be a distractible monk.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they even describe like how it felt like being drunk. Like they just wander from one idea to the next. They'd think about what they'd been doing this morning instead of what they were reading or what they wanted to do later. Like it's very relatable.
Because like what was an average day like for a monk? What was it supposed to be?
It was like a mix of praying, of course, and doing manual labor and reading and various like chores around the monastery.
Did monasteries get funding in some way, or how did they afford to function?
A lot of them were funded by lay people who like really were excited about this like monastic enterprise and they wanted to invest because monks they thought were experts at communicating with God, and so they could be more effective mediators for people who were maybe struggling more. So that's part of the reason monks felt so stressed out about not being very good at concentrating, is there was a lot riding on it.
Yeah, because like, was there any work that they were doing at the monastery that would bring in income for it?
Yeah, I mean, some of them were kind of poor places, but a lot of them had farmlands that they would either like sell crops on the market from, or even more lucrative was like just leasing out that land to farm to tenants. Some of them had like huge production facilities for like wine, for example, or had just like a lot of revenue from people who donated to them.
I feel like now they'd have a podcast studio. Like,
Oh my gosh,
Like and subscribe to
very
get into heaven.
enthusiastic new media adopters. I feel like some of them would have really taken to social media.
Really? What do you mean by that?
Well, like, you know, there were some monks who kind of liked trolling each other, and I feel like they'd have really done well.
I'm going to focus. I'm going to have the focus of a monk when I read this.
Yes.
The great Dilberto in chat wants to know, how many people would typically be in a monastery? How many people would it take to support a monastery?
There were monks who even just like lived on their own, although you wouldn't call them a monastic community then. Sometimes dozens, sometimes hundreds. They could get by with nothing. Some monks and monasteries prided themselves in being entirely self-sufficient and just providing their own needs themselves. And then others like subsisted on like a single massive donation from a ruler. Like it was just all over the place. Yeah.
In the game, they're talking about the library, right, at the monastery, or at the abbot, Nicole?
Yeah. So basically, they have a live access to a lot of books, but the person who's in charge now, the father there, he decides what you get to read. He decides whether or not this book is in line with God. And a lot of people in town are having issues with the fact that he is trying to erase the pagan history of this town. And a lot of people are like, hey, this is our culture. That kind of bums us out. Those sheep look pretty bummed about it.
Definitely monks like wrangled with like whether some reading was acceptable, particularly if it had been written like by pre-Christian authors. Most of the time they did think it was okay. They just needed to be cautious with it. There were also arguments too about like, could only certain monks have access to these like more complicated and ambiguous texts or not? But in general, they were like pretty ecumenical.
And this game starts to deal with Martin Luther and like who has the ability to read and who has access to these texts outside of the monastery. So I imagine that caused problems later down the line.
Well, that raises an interesting point about literacy in the Middle Ages, which is that although you know a lot of people weren't trained to read and write, a lot of people had what's called participatory literacy, where you were likely to have known at least someone in your area, or like your settlement or your village or town who knew how to read. So like if you needed some documents drawn up or you needed to read something that came your way, you could like make that happen. And then also there's like all of this fun interplay with writing and hearing, because a lot of texts would be read aloud rather than read in private. So those stories could also circulate really easily. Like a lot of monks are the reason we have access to like pre-Christian mythological traditions, is they were really interested in what they heard and wrote them down. So
Okay, so monks were also kind of like these record keepers then, in a sense.
yeah, they were also like major historians. So like a lot of our histories from the Middle Ages are by them. They were involved in like royal policy making and decision making. They were often advisors. Monasteries in the Middle Ages were like think tanks and agribusinesses and universities and real estate developers, like all at once.
Did you have to know how to read to become a monk, or could you become a monk and learn how to read?
You could learn how to read once you became a monk. They generally expected that everyone had to.
Oh.
That was like a policy from pretty early on, and it was pretty consistent.
Big thank you to Yoli Rodriguez for the donation.
Yes.
Also has a question for you. Was being a monk a lifelong career? Would they retire and do something else after so many years, or did you just kind of, work and live in the monastery until the end?
The general expectation was that you were a monk always, but people like actually quit all the time, or like were kind of backy-forthy and would like leave and come back, and generally their community was supposed to give them another chance. On the flip side, though, you do see a lot of people retire at monasteries having spent their whole life like doing something else. Some were even forced to retire there. Like in political conflicts, people would be like dispatched to a monastery as kind of like a half imprisonment, half like forced retirement situation. And it was a pretty good deal. Like actually,
Security.
Yeah, it was
right?
security. You had a lot of people around to take care of you, and there was this ethic of like needing to care for everyone who you lived with. Actually, some people who didn't end up retiring to become monks would still like donate all of their property to the monastery on the condition that the monastery would take care of them in their old age. So they'd like bring them food and like tend to them when they were ill.
This is a pretty good situation when there probably weren't like retirement homes in places.
Definitely like their standards of elder care were better than like many of us could even hope for now. But definitely the best you could get back then.
Monks, in your writing and research, are very, very obsessed with focus.
Well, they'd given up their whole lives to do this, right? Like they'd cut off ties with their families, they gave up their money, like this was all they were going to do. And so when they get to a monastic retreat and see how hard it is to concentrate still, they got really frustrated. Like they thought that like cutting off all this other stuff would do the trick. And so they realized like part of the problem is the mind is like embedded in all these other systems. Like it's embedded in a society and a body, and there's technology that interferes, and there's other people around. So they tried to take all of these different strategies to deal with that.
Did monks then in the early Middle Ages take vows of silence?
Some of them did. That happens especially like from the 9th century on. Some even developed their own systems of sign language, which is pretty cool. In general, they thought excessive chatting was not good.
Okay.
We kind of think of distraction today as like a really visual thing. Like stuff is pinging us, or we have a million tabs open, or like we're getting a bunch of texts. But they thought of it primarily as like auditory, like you keep hearing stuff that like pulls you away, and you can't like proactively close your ears. So
Sorry to interrupt, but I'm hearing about the grumpy old monk. Mm-hmm. Nicole, tell us about him.
Well, Brother Guy, which is his name, kind of a mean guy. And then Brother Piero, he's missing. Where is he?
ruh-roh.
He's not at his desk.
Do you know what terce is?
Terce is one of the hours. It's like mid-morning. Monks had to pray like multiple times a day, and they had like names for each of these times.
Where are they going then? They're going to go try to find this guy?
Well, so the you can hear the bell ringing, so that means that we are being paged.
Oh, that's like the bat signal for the monks?
So it's like a beeper. Remember beepers?
Yes, I do. Oh my gosh, the
Oh
scream
my gosh.
coming from the cloister?
It seems like the layout of this is like pretty spot on for like the kinds of components that a monastery had, like the dorm and the scriptorium and the church and the.
Laquarium. Was that a thing?
I don't know what I've never heard that word before.
That's where the fish live.
I like
In
saying
the
it.
aquarium. Uh-oh. Well,
He's been hurt.
I think...
Girl, he's dead.
Uh-oh. So the Baron is this very rich guy who just came to town yesterday, and he definitely seemed kind of to have his own motives, and a lot of people didn't trust him, and he's here to have the monks write him, to create some books for him, and I think he is now in heaven.
That's kind of the goal, though, right?
Such a good point.
There's something to be done. He's dead.
He's dead.
Okay, now we got ourselves a monk mystery.
We got a monk murder.
I'm in.
The monk murder series.
Not unlike the show Monk.
Right, he solved things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sister Margaret, calm yourself. Oh my gosh. I
See, they
hate
have
this.
women monks in this.
Yeah, but they're already calling her hysterical.
Yeah.
Come on, a man's
Yeah,
dead.
yeah, right? Like, I didn't take a vow of silence.
Yeah, I know. Tell me about it. I have to say, this seems like the biggest distraction that could happen to the monks
Yeah.
of any, like,
I feel like they'd be okay with this and not class it as a distraction. I think
murder?
They'd be like, this is a legit problem that needs some attention.
oh, okay. I see.
So distractions kind of have to be frivolous.
Yes.
Yeah, it's like, well, they acknowledge that a lot of their day actually felt like a distraction, but was necessary. Like, even people visiting the monastery, they were obligated to be hospitable. And it might feel like they were getting pulled away from prayer, and that's super annoying, but that's part of the, like, ethical work they committed to.
You've said that, they saw distraction as a matter of life and death. Dramatic? Is that a little dramatic?
It's a little drama. All of these outfits, a little camp.
They
Yeah.
were totally committed to this dramatic view where it was like, if you don't pay attention, your soul's salvation is at stake. That's the life or death part.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What techniques would they then use to combat distraction? I have a monk tips for focus list that I want to kind of try to build out here. And am I doing this for a friend
Yeah.
who's me? Yes, 100%.
Ye old fidget spinner, I'm assuming.
Well, I'll tell your friends some that are very unrealistic before getting to ones that are maybe a little bit more adaptable for us who aren't monks. Well, first of all, they cut off all these other things in their life that didn't matter. So we can't do that, but we can do something they did, which is decide what we want to pay attention to.
Prioritize.
Find your priority. We can do that.
Yeah. In theory, yeah.
Any other techniques or tips they
People, like, have people to work with who can be supportive of you, ideally be on the same schedule as you. You guys have this.
Yeah. And then also the added bonus of peer pressure.
Yeah. Yeah, so partly people are paying attention. If you slack off, they'll catch you. But also, like, if they're in it together and struggling, you can kind of, like, get moral support.
Yeah, they were like shaming each other.
Yeah, both shaming and helping. Some monks at a monastery called St. Gall in what's now Switzerland. They were especially well funded by royalty.
Okay.
And the kings would come to check on their investments by making sure that they weren't distractible by, like, throwing an apple and see if anyone flinched in prayer.
The kings just sound
Just,
so
like, come
bored.
on. And yeah, oh my God, and it's a total distraction to have to, like, host a king.
The kings are basically acting like micromanaging middle management.
Yeah, yeah,
We have nothing better to do, so we're going to come bother these monks.
exactly. Physical training, like, you've got to take care of your body. They did sort of weird stuff maybe we don't want to do, which is like bathe less and sleep less. So they thought this was really helpful.
Those are like two of my favorite things.
I know. But they were just like, take care of your body because your mind relies on it just as much as your body relies on your mind. Definitely they were like, books are really crucial to attention, but if you read too much, you're going to get distracted. They like marked up their books in interesting ways to like help themselves concentrate on the stuff that mattered, or they'd even format the books to begin with to help the ideas like really sink in and to meditate with more easily. And then they had all of these like techniques that we call like metacognitive today, which is like thinking about your own thinking. A really basic one that they called discernment was just watching your thoughts as they came up.
Oh, so just being really self-aware.
You're like just saying, okay, like a distracting thing just came up. Do I want that distracting thing or don't I? And it was a way of like not feeling like personally responsible for every thought that crossed your mind. You could just be like, nope, I don't want it. I don't have to feel bad about it, but I'm going to let it go.
It's almost like a mental conditioning of like, we dismiss that thought.
That's meditation in a lot of ways. Yeah.
And they would meditate too, but it's funny because they weren't interested in like clearing the mind. They were interested in like taking the mind down interesting pathways. They had this technique where you'd like pick a thing to think about, like the color blue or pigs, whatever, and think through all the stuff you'd read that relates to that thing, and just kind of like do a chain of associations. And to us, that actually looks like distraction, but they thought the mind loves moving around. Why not give it something to do?
Yeah, it seems like they were so insular and in tune with their own brains and minds and thoughts.
Yeah, they said it was a lot about like getting to know yourself better.
How does the monastic focus on learning about a topic compare to the modern university model?
Good question.
Yeah, so the old meditation model I described, that's that in some ways gets a little phased out in the High Middle Ages when the universities first start getting founded in Europe, and replaced with a model that we call scholasticism, which is more proceeding according to, I guess what we call like rational or logical argument. And we grow more out of that like later legacy where you're sort of supposed to approach something from a kind of bird's eye systematic view where you're like, I'm going to argue something comprehensively from all of the important sides. But the older meditational model, I think, was more realistic about something which is still true, that you can never, as a single person, like treat something exhaustively. It's always like your special take, the things you're interested in, the questions you ask.
Did monks travel? Like, did they leave the monastery and go out into the world?
Yeah, the ones who were trusted to like not get super distracted and like start just acting not like a monk anymore were allowed to go. Like sometimes they worked as like attorneys, or they would just be like property managers or like managing business.
It's not funny, but just the idea of them being like, we can't trust Mike, he'll get distracted.
Yeah, like he'll basically like go to some party and get really drunk. That's kind of the worry. I mean, you know, especially if you've not had these like fun things to do for a while and you were kind of still untested, it was a vulnerable opportunity. Sometimes they were just like, you shouldn't be eating like takeout food while you're out because like you're used to a certain monastic diet. Like,
well, did they tailor their diets in a way where they felt like it helped make them more focused?
usually they tried not to eat most meat. I mean, it's a little tricky. Some of them define vegetarianism as just not eating quadrupeds.
Okay. You know what? I know a lot of vegetarians who eat fish, and I'm like,
man?
You're like, that's a pescatarian.
that's a pescatarian. You are a liar.
Usually for them, the main thing was like portion control. Like, don't eat until you're full.
Okay. Did they fast?
They fasted. Sometimes that just meant only not eating certain things like any meat at all, like actually no meat. Sometimes it just meant like only eating once a day instead of twice. I mean, you really weren't supposed to do this if you lived in a community because fasting, like dieting today, got real competitive and people would like judge each other about how much they'd be eating or not. But like extreme monks might say like only have a piece of bread or like only eat a few lentils and have a drink of water, that kind of thing.
So monk dinner and girl dinner kind of paralleled each other.
Sounding that way. Yeah, I'm going to put portion control / girl dinner.
Actually, it's funny you say this because one monastery that had like both a women wing and a men's component, the women were like, we should be getting more food than the men because we need more. So they'd have been like, girl dinner, what's that?
Oh, yeah, I don't want that. Did monks have romantic relationships?
They did. Obviously weren't supposed to. Sometimes with each other. Sometimes they just like snuck out of the monastery. There's a really crazy incident from the 6th century where a monastery of women in France, in Poitiers, called Holy Cross, there's sort of these nuns fighting with each other, and in the like breakdown of the social order, like a bunch of nuns got pregnant. So definitely like these strict boundaries between inside and outside weren't always
Oh my
respected.
gosh, I feel like that would just unleash havoc, like a bunch of pregnant nuns.
We're doing an autopsy of this man, which I guess would monks also be trained in science?
Oh yeah, monks were some of the most involved in science, and actually, a lot of the people who learned the most about anatomy were monks, including women monks.
From the autopsy so far, it seems as though he may have fallen on his own dagger and that the wound may be self-inflicted.
A likely story.
Drama.
I mean, can we trust Eye Patch? You know, I don't know.
I think, yeah.
I feel like someone's going to come in with a bell and be like, it's time for the flipping of the corpse.
Yeah.
Flip him back over, like every
I'm not dead yet.
15 minutes. Yeah, I'm not dead yet. Yeah, Monty Python and the Holy Grail. How accurate.
Yeah.
Actually, they got a lot right. I mean, part
Tell
of
me
it,
more.
Did the bringing out of the dead?
No, I
Oh.
mean, I think what I like best about that movie is they poke fun at what we expect the Middle Ages to look like. So there's like a bunch of smoke machines,
Yeah.
and everything's really dark, and like the peasants are just moving piles of
Dirt.
dirt around. They're like they're making fun of us for thinking the Middle Ages are terrible.
If I was Eye Patch guy, my eyes would be perfectly fine, but I'd keep moving the eye patch to see if anyone noticed. I'd just be doing monk pranks all day. Oh, wait, Nicole, do you suspect that a nun was involved?
I do. So when the Baron first came into the church yesterday, the nuns were like, "Get out of here!" And then when you ask Mother Cecilia about it, she's like, "Why would I tell you?" Which implies to me that something happened with the nuns last time
Keeping
the
a
Baron was
secret.
here. Yeah,
Or she's just like, back off, I'm sick of people coming in here.
Oh, yeah.
both kind of valid.
None your business.
None your business.
You know? Oh, fun fact from our producer, Lauren. Monty Python came to the U.S. via Robert Wilson at PBS member station KERA in Dallas.
PBS origin story?
Gosh, we need more like from the vault of PBS facts on this show, I think.
Thank goodness for
because-
PBS.
So we didn't really get specific answers here, but we think a nun might know something.
I think that if a nun was involved, she was beyond justified.
Thank you so much for joining us, Jamie. If you've enjoyed Jamie talking, you can get to some Jamie reading.
Yeah, if you're interested in monks and distraction, you can check out Wandering Mind, which is a history of how monks struggled with distraction, or go straight to the source and read a translation of John Cassian's guidance on how to focus from the 5th century.
What if we want to get a little bit wilder, Jamie? What do we read then?
Yeah, if you want to go outside the box and learn about, say, pigs in the early Middle Ages, then check out Legions of Pigs.
And if you haven't watched our episode with Jamie where we talk about medieval pigs, go watch that right now.
Right now.
Thank you so much to everyone for supporting us and continuing to come back to the channel time and again. YouTube.com/@won'tyoubemygamer. Nicole, how can they continue to support us?
It's so easy. Just head on over to pbssocal.org/gamer and make a donation. Any amount helps. We're so appreciative. Thank you to everyone who has already donated, and thanks in advance to all those who are about to.